Hello, welcome back. Today I'm going to show you guys how to paint this Valentine's heart. This is a painting that I've done like 6 or 7 years now. I love, if you follow my disco ball, painting objects on their shaped canvases. The theme of today's painting is not only to show you how to paint one of these and walk you through my process, but also to tell you why self-love, self-compassion is vital to any creative practice. So much of creativity is taking risks and being resilient and trying new things and being curious. And so it's a very Valentine's love themed day. I love Valentine's Day, by the way. I just love the aesthetic, the pink. I love that it can be romantic love, but it can also be love for anyone, love for your children, love for your students, people, humanity, your city, whatever. And I think that one of the most slept on forms of love is love towards self. It can often be reflected as being selfish or self-indulgent. And in reality, I think a really well-regulated and well-grounded sense of self-love and respect is one of the most important things you can do for yourself as a person, but I think specifically as an artist. I've worked with artists in the past, I've coached them, and a theme that comes up is often perfectionism. And if you follow the root cause of that perfectionism, usually it goes back to a moment in their life where you didn't think you had permission to make a mistake, or maybe it was genuinely a risky thing to make a mistake. It would have called attention to yourself, and your survival depended on you being quiet and good and perfect. And I'm just gonna root for you in this video and tell you why I think you should make mistakes, and I think you should love yourself regardless. So if you want to hear both of those things, you want to paint along with me, then grab your heart canvas. I put links to where you can find these, your acrylic paints or oil, and let's jump into the tutorial. So I'm going to start this process by mapping out where my chocolates are going to go. I think I'm going to start with the size 6 brush. Whatever brush you're most comfortable drawing in with, and if you are more comfortable drawing in with pencil, that's fine. And I'm just going to choose any color. So the cerulean blue is just kind of calling to me. Most of this will be covered up, and if not, that's totally fine. We accept our imperfections in our painting process. And as I mentioned in the introduction, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about self-compassion and self-love. The fun part about this is I'm likely going to make mistakes. And truthfully, guys, that's the key here. You're going to make mistakes, and just sort of learning to be kind to yourself through it. I think there's a misconception that being nice to yourself equals giving yourself a pass to be bad at something, but truthfully could not be further from the truth. I think being kind to yourself gives you the ability to be consistent, and being good is contingent on consistency, not high level of standards, right? You can only get to where you have a higher level of standards if you are consistent. And if you're too hard on yourself, then you won't be consistent. So it kind of reminds me, this thought process of, I worked with some aspiring artists in this artist coaching kind of program I did with some students, and it was really fun. I found it to be deeply rewarding. But I had one student who really struggled with putting themselves out there and being more productive. This person was incredibly talented, is incredibly talented, and I have full faith that they will be a great artist. But they were really, really hard, I think, on themselves, and really struggled to think what they were doing was worth it. Some artists that I've worked with are really caught up in the idea of having the perfect idea, right? Skill, they're a little nicer with on themselves, but when it comes to making a good idea, having an idea worth putting all the energy of promotion and the work that goes into painting into it, was something that they seem to kind of really struggle with. And I remember I learned something about them after our time together, where there was a miscommunication, very easily fixed kind of miscommunication, and they were incredibly harsh about it, even with another person. And I remember having this light bulb moment, because the whole time we worked together, they were great, they made great work, they seemed to have everything kind of working for them as far as their ability to have time to make art, their ability to not depend on their art for income so that they could focus on the fun projects and the more fulfilling projects. They had the time to be able to travel. They were, again, very talented. But all of a sudden it clicked to me why this person might be struggling with productivity. And it all came down to they just had very little space for mistakes. And a mistake felt like a threat. And that's where my already leaning proclivity towards like thinking that being kind to yourself, being compassionate, being forgiving if you make mistakes, being curious instead of judgmental really solidified itself. And I always like to back up my claims with science. Like I have at this point, having been an artist for 15 years, but career-wise closer to 10, I have developed, my own instincts, and my instincts very much tell me compassion is the key, but I always second guess myself a little. And so I've looked up for this video different studies that really back this up. And basically there is a study that shows that self-compassion helps people cope with failure and view mistakes as learning opportunities rather than reflections of their worth. And I think that's always the key, is like looking at your art from big picture. Like, yes, big picture, your art expresses who you are, but not every individual painting or even mark is gonna always be a perfect gauge of who you are and your worth as an artist. A mistake that I see a lot of artists make is that they only feel as good as their most recent work. And I can tell you, as someone who's deep in the creative process, that is no way to live. You make a few good paintings in a row and then a few kind of not so good paintings in a row, and that's incredibly normal. I'm gonna mix a dark, almost black, but have it lean blue. Once again, that cerulean blue I think is gonna come in clutch. And I'm gonna use this to paint in the background. So I'm hoping it's not super dark. Okay, it's pulling green. The way to get that closer to blue, the opposite of green is red. So I'm gonna do quinacridone magenta, and hopefully that'll turn it more neutral, maybe a little purpley. I am really passionate about teaching color and how to use it and how to navigate it with it. I think it's like one of the most helpful skills to have as an artist. So I think this is right where I want it. It's like a cool black kind of color. Dark gray, almost black. We'll start there. So I ran cross country in college, so long distance running. I also ran track. There's a lot of skills that go into being a really good distance runner, collegiate level scholarship kind of distance runner. And the things that always come to mind is speed and strength and endurance. And yes. But also one of the skills or talents or things that often gets overlooked is durability. And what I mean by that is, when you're running, up to 90 miles a week, I probably averaged close to 70 miles a week throughout my entire career, but there were weeks that I would do 90 miles a week. When you're doing that kind of mileage on your body, you have to have the strength and resiliency in your bones and ligaments and mentally to be able to not get injured, not get something like a plantar fasciitis. I would never blame someone for getting, an injury, right? And that's not what we did in college either. But people who either just by luck, or maybe they're super proactive with stretching and taking care of any little, knee pain that sort of cropped up and taking it really seriously from the get-go. Between all of those things, some you can control and some you can't, the athletes who a lot of times were really good were the ones who were durable enough to put up with that, the rigor of training. And so in a similar way, as a creative, your ability to be resilient is another one of your skills, right? You think, okay, well, I'm gonna be really good at drawing or really good at color or, really prolific, and all of those things, yes, they do, they can create what we conceive of as a good artist. I tend to think it's more personal, but however, one of the things that gets slept on is the ability to continue, to show up, to be resilient. And I will say resilience gets a good rap. Resilience, when it's not carried out over a long enough time to see fruit from it, can just look like someone like, you know, in hindsight, we always look at someone who didn't give up and was resilient with like rose tinted glasses. It's like, yeah, they pushed through and that's why they were good. But in the beginning of being resilient, when you're first showing up, a lot of the times the power comes from you doing something like making a painting, it not being very good. You know, that's subjective, but let's just say for all intents and purposes, you make a painting, it's not very good. And then you keep showing up anyways. It flies directly in the face of another sort of platitude that we have in our culture, which is, you know, what's the definition of insanity? It's like doing something over and over and getting the same result and doing it anyways, right? And it can feel like that when you start a practice. Like if you're not immediately good or you're immediately improving, it's like give up. Like it's so cringy. It's so, you know, embarrassing to not be good at something, especially if you do it publicly and you share it online or you share it with your friends and family. And I think it's for that reason that people often, you know, avoid being as resilient as you should. And so for that reason alone, I think that having an active self-compassionate practice for yourself allows you to show up and be resilient, because you have to get over that hump of this feels crazy. Like I'm not good right away. I'm not, you know, it doesn't feel like I'm improving right away, because painting can take, you know, a lot of creative things, but painting can take a while to get better at. It's a long game, you know? One of my bigger philosophies in life is kind of like pick your battles when it comes to like making mistakes. Like mistakes are not all created equal. And I think sometimes people have this sort of mentality when they make mistakes of like keeping tally, like, oh, it's another mistake, it's another mistake, it's another mistake, instead of like thinking about like, well, is this a mistake I need to fix? And like, what does fixing it look like? You know, for me, I've learned in painting anyways, that like a lot of my mistakes are just like, the next step, I'll just cover it up. And okay, it's not that big a deal. So, you know, I think we can get into the idea of, you know, quantity of mistakes kind of defines us. We allow how we view ourselves to be kind of hardened around like, I make a lot of mistakes. Like, you know, I do make a lot of mistakes, especially with my art, like as a person. Like there's a saying with like motherhood where it's like, you know, motherhood is a juggling act, and a skill of being a mom is knowing which balls are made of glass and which balls are made of plastic. And the way I always interpret that is it's like, it's not quantity of mistakes, but it's the quality of mistakes. So like, you know, I put more energy into mistakes that I know might hurt someone else. Obviously, like in my personal life, I try, but also I have learned that like, if you make a mistake and it's easily solved, like don't over-identify with it. You know, just develop a process that allows you to make those mistakes and then allows you to easily fix them. So the first step was just putting in roughly the same-ish color, gray, bluish gray outline of the little cupcake holder thing. I probably should know the word for that, but I digress. Anyways, now I'm gonna introduce more variation. So where I would put this little bit lighter color is anywhere where the foil cupcake liner part is touching another one and it feels blobby. What is blobby? You kind of know when you see it. Everyone's bar of like what they consider to be blobby is going to be different, just like everyone's bar of what they view as unacceptable or a mistake is going to be different. And you know, that's the beauty of being an artist, is you kind of fine tune your own sense of blobbiness, I guess. So I just look, and there's some areas where they just don't feel fully carved out. So I'm just gonna hit those spots with a little bit, I'm using the same brush, lighter, almost like a bit of a highlight. Layers are the name of the game with painting, I think in general, if I can be so broad, but specifically with this style. And I teach in this style in particular. You know, I paint with a few different styles at this point, just because of my years of painting. But I teach in this particular style because it's the most forgiving to learning. You both learn the foundations, which like if you want to get better at painting, that's what you do. But then also it teaches you in a style that's like, if you make a mistake, you just layer over it. You know, all mistakes, well, maybe not all, the vast majority of mistakes, in my opinion, have little bits of like insights to them, or like something that's worth keeping. And so even if like 90% of your first layer was like weird and wonky and not quite right, you can kind of look back and be the judge and be like, well, that one corner was actually pretty good. Or I'll keep that. Or next time I'll make sure to include that, or whatever. Okay, so we're making progress. It's not done, but we're getting really close. I've done a lot of the outline part and the chocolates are all filled in. In my opinion, the fun part is next. So I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna mix up some other chocolatey browns and some reds, and we're going to put the finishing touches on our self-love Valentine's chocolate box, heart box. I'm going to make like a milk chocolate and use it as like sprinkles, or what is it called? Like ribbons of decoration. If you go and look at, just Google like boxes of chocolate, you'll see lots of examples of little decorative chocolates, and you can use those as like guideline. I see a bunch that have these like stripes on them, so that's what I'm gonna do for this. And the thing is, you wanna make sure that there's like kind of an arch to them to make them look more rounded. So that's what I'm doing here. In my research, another thing that I saw that was really important for creativity is specifically like self-compassion. There's lots of links to people struggling with or exacerbating anxiety and depression. Obviously, I'm not a psychiatrist, and also those are incredibly valid diagnoses, and you can't control that a lot of times, like totally, I'm not gonna go there. But one of the exercises that help people with some symptoms of anxiety and depression is developing a practice of self-compassion. And I can remember when I first started therapy many, many years ago, I did an exercise where I sort of said thank you to my inner child for doing the best they could, and like, just gave myself that like love and affirmation. And I know it sounds like a little hokey, and from the outset it did feel kind of silly, but it was one of the most impactful things I've ever done in regards to like therapy, and I definitely like recommend it. It was really fun doing research for this painting, seeing all the different ways you can decorate chocolates. I really enjoyed that. You kind of forget that pastry makers or like chocolate makers, I'm forgetting, there's probably like a specific word for if you create chocolate candies, but there's so much artistry to it. So, a lot of the stripes are different colors to reflect the interiors, and I just think it's very cute. I also know that I made my dark chocolate, I think a little bit too dark, so I'm gonna go in and mix a slightly lighter dark chocolate color. So even here, you can see where I mixed this dark chocolate color too dark, and the color I'm correcting it with, I think it just adds to the depth of it, because I'm not covering up every square millimeter of the chocolate, just like the middle part, which kind of reflects the depth. Because if you think of it, like a chocolate is like inside of a little container, so there would be like shadows around it. So what started out like a mistake, a very clear, like my color was too dark, ended up being, I think, kind of a win. So it's like I couldn't have planned this, although I could have anticipated I'd make a mistake on camera. But by showing this to you guys, I'm able to show you like a real example of what this can look like. I've said before that, some of my favorite paintings are realist paintings, but painted in a way where, like, especially when you get up close, it doesn't look super realistic. Like Singer Sargent is kind of a master of this. And if you've seen his work in person, you know that when you are across the room, it looks so realistic. But then when you get up close, it's just these really loose brush marks. And I love that kind of painting a lot. What's cool about it is like when you paint something and it's like perfectly real, it looks photorealistic, it's impressive. I have a great appreciation for that kind of work, truly, not just lip service. Like I really think it's, especially in like process videos, very cool to watch. But I think it's more fun as a viewer to look at something that's a little looser and more abstract and maybe messy and maybe full of mistakes in a way. Because it feels like playing catch. Like it's more fun to catch a ball like across a big field than it is to catch a ball when the person throwing it to you is like 1 inch away. I think paintings where everything's hyper rendered, again, impressive in its own merit, but it does kind of feel like the task you're doing is catching a ball that's like an inch from you. And the reason why that's just less, I think, impressive is because it's all spelled out. There's no room for interpretation or, you know, personal style or anything like that, or less room. Okay, so I think I'm at a point where I think I'm done with the chocolates, but one thing I want to do is just add a little bit of depth and intentionality to the spaces between the chocolates, which it's like a minor thing to notice, but it's the little things I think that add up. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna mix basically a black color just to be like a shadowy dark color in here. I still want it to look more blue than any other color, so I'm gonna add a lot of ultramarine. And just hit the shadowy parts. And anywhere that I got kind of aggressive around the edges, just kind of reinforce that. Another reason I always try to embrace my mistakes is because one thing I know about me, I assume this is true with a lot of people, but I can only speak to myself, is that I'm always gonna be a better painter when, instead of my goal being just to do something perfect the first time, right? Like I'm gonna paint a face or a box of chocolates or, you know, whatever, a still life. Instead of sort of pushing myself to like get it right the first time, I sort of let that off my shoulders. And instead I say what I will lack in precision and accuracy, I will make up for in process. So my approach is always, you know, okay, I might have to go over this 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, but usually 3 or 4 times to get this to look right. But I trust that my ability to come to something with fresh eyes, again, 3, 4, 5 times, is gonna yield a much better product. Like even if you are product focused, you should be process focused, but even if you are, even if you're like, I'm listening to this because I just wanna get better, then by having, like letting go of that, I need to be perfect right away, not only does that create a kinder practice, in my opinion, but it also gives you the chance to have a better shot at making better artwork, in my opinion. So by letting yourself, you know, take a few attempts at it, like right now I'm cleaning up some of my slightly imperfect brush work whenever I was putting in these edges, I'm making the painting better. All right, so I think I'm done with this. It's always hard to walk away and know exactly when you're done. Weirdly, looking at it in the viewfinder makes me think that maybe it's done. Hopefully this was enlightening, and my goal is that you walk away more encouraged. If you do this, make sure you tag me, let me know. I'd love to see it. And as always, I say this all the time, but credit is currency for artists. You know, it's a big part of why I teach, is so if people want to learn more, they can find me and learn the basics through my online art school. And then also if, you know, someone wants to go find the person who did it first, then they can go find me. So credit is always like so helpful. I cannot thank you guys enough when you do credit me. It means truly the world to me. I know you don't have to, and so when you do, it just means a lot. But yeah, thank you. Have a kinder, more compassionate practice for yourself, and I'll see you guys in the next video.